character, we've been working with what we see as a char ch. Okay, so this is how we are going to work with characters. Mm.
Sir,
Excuse me, can you just help me to basically, I'll just have my breakfast now. If you have got any questions about the last previous classes, can you just ask me between this?
sir, I had one.
Yeah.
Sir, last day you taught us about masking, that is masking an integer with a float type. Can you
Mhm.
please re-explain that part?
Okay. Let's go to that program then. Mm, can I remember which one is what? I believe this is the one. Yeah. See, we are talking about line number 23. Okay. Think in this way. So what I had done was basically, now my Celsius was actually in a float, right? No, not this one. Not this one. Not this one. I believe this is the one. Yeah, this is the one, right? So my Celsius was a float. Now, if I did not, if I had not basically converted this part, done this thing, then what would have happened? What would have happened? Can you tell me? Far is basically an integer. So integer divided by a integer, technically it should give me a float, right? But my this one will also be considered, right? But since both are actually floats, since both my divisor and my dividend both are floats, my result will be actually a will be also will be an integer, right?
Yes.
And when I'm going to multiply it with 5, which is actually also an integer, the resultant which will give me here, even though my Celsius is actually a float, it will give me the integer value followed by some zeros. This is what is going to happen. Now, this is something which I do not require. So what do I do? The trick is that if I actually convert my this value, so 32.0 to 9.0. So my 32.0 right now becomes a float value. This is the real number, right?
Hmm.
This no more remains an integer. Far is an integer.
Yes.
So I'm having an integer minus a float value. Now the size of float is larger than my integer. So what's going to happen is that my far is going to be temporarily converted to a float temporarily, just for this calculation. And so my far becomes a float. Float minus float divided by a float becomes a float, right?
Then,
Becomes a
sir,
float. Yeah.
shouldn't we declare far as a float before line number 17? Because in line number 17, the operation is being done between a float and an integer. Is that allowed?
No. Why do I require it? Let's see one thing. My lower far is basically 0. My upper far is 100, 300, and I'm actually increasing it by integer. So
Okay.
I'm just increasing it by integer. So why I'm going to take, let's take for example, my float value takes basically, let's say for 8 bytes, right? So if I convert all these integers to an 8, so the amount of space in the memory is going to take, that will be 8 into 4 and 32 bytes, right?
Okay.
Whereas my integer, it takes only 2 bytes. So 8 bytes and 32 bytes, I'm going to save as 16 bytes, I'm going to data. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot. I should basically
Okay.
go for that part. Hmm.
Okay.
So over here in this line number 17, integer minus float. So since I'm basically dividing it by, I'm actually basically subtracting a float from it. What is happening is basically my far becomes by default, it becomes also a float value. So what happens is that float minus float becomes a float, divided by a float becomes a float. Now it was multiplied down. Now 5 is an integer, right? Now immediately when it sees basically it's been multiplied by an integer, so my 5 also basically starts behaving like a float. So my float multiplied by a float becomes a float. So which is Celsius. So remember one thing is that if there is a divisor or a dividend or a multiplicand which has got a higher data type, the size of the data type is basically higher, all the others follows actually. So technically, if I had done this thing also, this would have also worked. Why? Far is an integer, is an integer. So integer minus integer is a integer, but being divided by a float. But it's being divided by a float. So once it's been divided by a float, by this far minus 32 starts, then integer value starts behaving like a float also. So float, so since it starts behaving like a float, so float by float becomes a float. Multiplied by 5 again starts behaving like a float because float's data size of the float is higher and it gets stored into the float.
Okay, sir.
Mind you, what I'm saying, I'm actually saying it's going to start behaving, the value will not change. Okay, the value will not change.
Then if after this line I suppose
I'll just start off. This is not continue.
Okay.
Now, this will also work. This behaves the same way. So what is happening over here? So this will become in brackets, right? Now what will happen? What is going to happen over here? Far minus 32, this is an integer, is being masked with a float. So this far minus 32, the value which is an integer, it starts behaving like a float due to this float divided by an integer. Now, so it's basically float divided by an integer. So my integer below part starts again behaving float again, right? So it becomes float by a float multiplied basically 5, which again starts behaving like an integer float. So float divided by a float multiplied by a float. So this part you can say this is basically what we see as masking. I have masked my integer value to behave like a float value.
Okay, sir. Then, sir, if after line number 17 I print the value of Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
then will I get a float value or an integer value?
No, you will get an integer value because my far is actually an integer value.
After masking also I will get an integer value.
Masking is basically something like you have in a dramas, let's say go for dramas, okay, you put on a, so do you change your characteristics? So when you put on a mask, what happens? You start feeling the character of the mask which you are actually wearing, but you have not yourself changed. You are as it is.
Okay. Um, That
You
means
remain
the
as
masking part, it's totally internal. Like for for calculating the formula,
it's
the
totally
masking part.
no, it's not for it's for it's only meant for, it's a totally temporary phase. Till that mask is there, that part is working. But immediately after this, so my far, so let's take for example far, if I use it by next line as I have used, so my far will remain as an integer. My far will be my far's intricate property is an integer. In line number 17, I'm actually forcing it to mask to be working as a, to mask it as a what do you say, as a float. This thing works, even this thing also works. This thing will also work. This thing will also work. So what is happening over here? In this part, far, which is an integer, and I'm asking to make a float. So my far will start behaving like a float right now. So minus an integer. So since my float is a higher data type, since my float is in higher data type, so my 30 will start behaving like an integer float. So float minus float, it will be a float divided by again a 9, which is an integer starting behaving to be like an integer. So the rule something goes like this. So float divided by an int, it gives a float. Int divided by a float gives a float. Then int divided by an int gives you an int. So the int divided by an int, when you give an int divided by int, by default the result which is what you are going to get, you are going to get it as an integer. But then if you try to store this float value, int value into a float, what's going to happen? That integer is going to come out with a followed by a number of zeros, because you're trying to store that value in a float. Even a float minus an int will give you a float, right? A float plus an int will give you a float. It's all there. So my float is of the higher data type, right? My integer is of the lower data type. So whenever I'm trying to do some mathematical operation with a higher data type and a higher size data type and a lower size data type, right? What's going to do? It's going to basically take the form of the higher data type. Right, so it's basically plus or multiply. Any question here?
No, sir.
Okay, if you are not convinced, we can basically work it out also. Well, let's take for example, let's see something like so. So let's say have something. So int number int num is equal to say 3, right? And I have some float num is equal to 4.0, right? So let's see what happens. And I'll be having something like int answer, float answer. My this part will actually come first. So my assignment statements goes last, right? So int answer is equal to int num multiplied by float num, right? So I'm going to copy this part. So I've basically done something. So float num int num multiplied by float, and I have got something like so float multiplied by float. You won't have any problem. So that will become the float. Int will come with so the problem becomes something like this. So what I do is basically let's see printf. So I'll try to printf all these numbers int answer as int equals to percentage %t. Is float percentage %f control v. So this one will be as a float answer. What I need to do something like this slash n. So slash n. So I have got a intents, right? Intents float ends. So everybody understood what I'm trying to do over here? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So let's compile this thing. Let's see what happens. Yeah, so you see there's some warning which I'm trying to get in. So percentage f accepts of double, but increment has an integer. So due to this, you can see, due to this, what I'm trying to do over here, what I've tried to do over here is I'm trying to monarchy take these integer answers, intents, which is an int, to basically try to force it to be basically as a print to be as a float. And the float ends, I'm trying to basically print it as an int. So it's going to give you a warning. So warning means that, okay, you are actually losing some data, which is not expected. So you might creep up some errors. So the warning expects an integer, but argument as float. So warnings, it will work out. Warnings, it will work out. Problems with warnings is that in a program is that in the long run, if you have got a very large program, you do not know what effect is going to have it in some for different for any other functions where you use or any other place where you would use that value. So so it is not advised to actually have warnings, right? So let's take first. So just to for let's see what actually comes up. Yeah. So what is actually happening over here? So this one hasn't actually basically changed. Okay, so this one hasn't changed. So what I require to do is basically, so you can actually see an effect. So this is basically, I can have another variable by the name of mask float, right? Mask float. Now I'm actually going to mask it. So the thing is going to come out. Mask float as int is equal to %t /n mask float as float percentage f. Okay. Yeah. Okay, now there is certain problem. Let's see to this thing. Yeah. See the last line. See what is basically working like. You can actually then see what's happening. So this is basically my print output. Have a look at the print line and then see the combinations which I've actually tried to do.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, why is there a discrepancy in mask float as int?
Where mask
Uh,
float as
And the answer that come output.
I'm trying to basically what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to basically print a mask float as an integer. So it's going to give you some error. So this is what I'm trying to say actually. If you're trying to do something which is not required, right? So I'm trying to print this mask float as an integer, which is actually a float value, right? You will not get a right answer. You might get something which is basically abnormal. So this is where your abnormality lies. You are already warned. When you had actually compiled it, you are already warned. So if you actually see your warning, you are already warned about it. So why basically argue about your answer which you're going to get?
Yeah, so but where is the abnormality coming from? Like like the exact -16 and the entire thing.
So this is basically mask float, which
Sir.
I'm going to basically print as an integer. So my mask float is basically I'm converting to a mask. So this is gets to be as a float divided by a float. It stays as a float. So again, in the previous one also, well, this abnormality you cannot basically you cannot you do not know why this abnormality is coming, but these sorts of abnormalities will come because in one way what you are actually trying to do, you are trying, but there is a loss of data. Okay, technically there is an explanation. Okay, there is an explanation. The explanation is that uh, let's say you this float value, right? This float value has got a basically larger box, right? It's a large box, right? Where you keep your value. Now, when you see it as an int, you are going to see a partially of that data, partially of that data, which of that float value. Now, when you see that partial data, you're going to interpret that partial data as what you are going to see. That is what it is doing over here. It is interpreting that mass float value as that partial float value as an integer and is actually interpreting it as what it is seeing. So it is actually seeing something like this. But I do not know. Let's see one thing. This value should actually change.
Sir,
Yeah, you see one thing. Notice one thing. Okay.
Yes, sir.
This is actually basically is a very good idea. So you see one thing. See another thing. So this mass value, this actually changes. You can see. This starts changing. Can you notice one thing?
yes, sir. Sir,
Why?
then that means we
Yeah.
can print a lower data type
No, it's
as a
not.
higher data type, but not the other way around.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, sir.
Lower higher data type, lower data type as an higher data type, but when you're going to print a higher data type as a lower data type, you're going to have problems. Okay, my point of basically showing you this thing is basically another thing is that when a processor, when the operating system basically allocates a location for a certain variable, it does it randomly, right? So since it is doing randomly in some random place, so it has got, I won't say it's random, but operating system has got its own rule. So it tries to find a free space. So whenever it finds a free space, it's going to place that. So when that free space has got some other data, or it might be overlooked as some data also, override it from some previous process which is no more running. So when it sees that data as an integer, it starts interpreting in its own way. So those values are actually basically always. Those values becomes different always. I'm going to this part you will not be able to you'll have a little bit problems of basically understanding this part. But when I'm going to get into numerical analysis, you'll see that there is a lot of errors of data. So as somebody pointed out, yes, it is right. When you're trying to basically interpret a higher value sizes of higher values of data type of as a, we are going to face problems. Lower values, when you convert it to higher values, hardly it matters. You're not going to lose data. Rather, one way you can actually gain data also. Okay, which might be erroringless, which might be errorless, which will have errors, but then you're actually getting some data. But when you convert that, when it becomes vice versa, then you're going to face a lot of problems. So this is what you actually see, one of the examples. Okay. Any question? Any other question? Am I clear on the masking part? Are we clear? Even though this masking is not very much important, but these rules, these things are very important. So the concept that basically when you are actually multiplying or dividing up integer value with a lower value, this thing becomes a little bit, this becomes important. This becomes important. So let's get to this part. So working with cats. Okay. Okay. Just before something, I'd like to show something. Okay. Since we are doing this part only, let's see something. Uh,
স্যার আমার একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল
mm.
স্যার এই লাস্ট প্রোগ্রামে ফ্লোট অ্যান্সটাকে আমরা ওটাতে একটা ফ্লোট ভ্যালু স্টোর করছে ওটাকে আমরা ইন্ট হিসাবে প্রিন্ট করলে আনসার কারেক্ট দেখাচ্ছে বাট মাস্ক ফ্লোটটা ইন্ট হিসাবে প্রিন্ট করলে এরর আসছে সেটা কেন
দেখো মানে এইটার কোনো এক্সপ্লেনেশন তোমাকে দেওয়া যেতে পারবে না এটার কোনো এক্সপ্লেনেশন নেই জাস্ট মানে আর কি জাস্ট মানে আন্ডারস্ট্যান্ড দ্যাট বেসিক্যালি how your process actually is basically interpreting your system. Okay, so it's something like when again I was saying that তুমি একটা কিছু মানে মানে লেটস সে ফর এক্সাম্পল তুই একটা মাস্ক পরে আছিস ঠিক আছে এবার তোকে সামনে থেকে দেখতে যেটা লাগবে তুই তো বেসিক্যালি তুই ঠিক আছে তোর উপর একটা মাস্ক বুঝি এবার তোর সাইড ভিশনটা কিন্তু ঠিক দেখাবে না কিন্তু সাইড থেকে তোকে পার্শিয়ালি তোর চেহারাটা দেখতে পারবে কিন্তু তুই যে তুই সেটা তো তোকে হয়তো নাও বুঝতে পারে so that is where the interpretation comes in that is where the interpretation comes in
স্যার মানে আমি ফ্লোট হিসাবে আগে থেকে ডিক্লেয়ার করলে আর মাস্ক করলে কম্পিউটার সেটাকে ডিফারেন্ট ভাবে ইন্টারপ্রেট করছে
Yes,
এই জন্য
হ্যাঁ,
এরর
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ Rather, এটা কিন্তু advised, it is not at all advised that you will basically do all these মানে আর কি conversion, মানে এই যে তোর যে ওয়ার্নিং গুলো আসছে না, এটা কিন্তু এমনি এমনি আসছে না, কিন্তু এটা কিন্তু এমনি এমনি আসছে না। So it is advised that basically মানে you should what do you say, মানে এই যে warnings যেগুলো আসছে, please read the warnings first. So what is the last warning? Let's take for example line number 15. So line number 15, column number 122. So line number 15, so এখানে একটা পাওয়া যায়। So line number 15, so this is the line number 15. So line number 15, there is a column number, character number 122. So this says that format percentage expects an argument of type int, but argument 6 has a type long signed answer, long unsigned int. ঠিক আছে, এটা হচ্ছে তাহলে তোর 15 নম্বর লাইন। আচ্ছা, আমি 13 নম্বর লাইনটাতে যাচ্ছি। Let's go for the 13 number line. Line number 13 says that format percentage expects of type int, but argument 6 has double. So what is the argument 6? So argument 6 is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So argument 6 has got double. So this one is basically a double type. মানে এইটা হচ্ছে তো ডাবলস হচ্ছে, so the values basically are starting to lose some over here. Okay, so double, it basically it takes basically the larger value. So as you can see one thing, এটাতে আমি এখানেও যেটা করেছি, so this is basically a long. So long means that basically it's a long integer type. So an integer has got a certain data type size. Long int will have a larger one, and a double will have also the larger one. Okay, so this is basically, so what it is by default, what it is doing is that when you're actually calculating it, so this is what is happening. So this value, it says that okay, the value which you have got is type of the higher data type, but you're trying to basically print it as a point percentage d. So you are actually going to face some problems. Why are you trying to do it? Again, over here, line number 1351, it says that this is again a warning, format percentage f. So this percentage f, right, of argument 3 has basically has a double, but it has got a basically you're trying to print an int. You are trying to basically print int as a float, right? So these warnings will be given to you. This is because the compiler helps you to do it, to actually remove these sorts of errors which is going to happen. This value, if you actually, let's imagine this integer mask float, which you actually basically saved it as an integer. If you had used it further in some other part of the program, you would have ended up with some huge problems. So that is why these warnings are there. But why they are actually interpreted in some way is that this is the problem with the design of the system, you can say actually. The design, the architecture of the system, or rather the design of the system, I mean to say it's basically the hardware part. So what you are actually doing is basically the machine, this compilation a.out is basically a machine dependent program. Okay, so it's been converted into a machine. So how this whole thing is basically interpreted from the hardware to your software to what you are actually seeing, it actually follows a certain rule. So if you actually go wave out of that rule, you're going to face some problems, and this is one of the problems. I'm trying to avoid some words because these things you're going to learn when you're going to study architecture. There is a subject by the name of architecture only. Okay, so you will understand a lot of things when you actually study that part. Another thing, you will actually there is another part where the interpreting of there is a data loss. I'll come to that when I'm going to study, when we're going to work with numerical methods. But this thing is totally dependent on how your architecture is and how your compiler, how your operating system interprets your architecture. The architecture meaning is that how your hardware is actually designed. Might be this whole thing, if you actually run it in Windows operating system, you will see another answer, believe me. So you must be ready for, if you actually work with this same program, if you write it in a Windows compiler or the Windows Visual Studio compiler, Microsoft compiler, you'll see the result coming to be, maybe you'll see the result to be actually coming nearly right. You might see basically the result to be coming right. The only reason is that operating system Microsoft, as it interprets that hardware and how Unix basically interprets that hardware, that is different. Okay. Any question? So let's see the output of this thing. I will be mainly pressing on this part. You see, int value has got basically size 4. There is another one, I believe so. Yeah. Just for a second. I'll just remove this part. It's much more clearer then. Okay. Let's see what my program says. Okay, size of, basically let's go to this function by the way which I've used, size of. Okay, size of is, even though it looks like a function, this is actually an operator. This is an operator. What are the operators? The operators are basically plus, minus, division, multiplication, subtraction. These are what my operators are, right? So this is a function, but this is an operator which looks like a function. So size of, what it does is basically it gives a size of that size of the character of the variable or the data type in bytes. It gives it in bytes. Okay, so and the data type which is actually returns, if you actually see man size of, sorry, it's not there anymore. Okay, so size of basically returns a data type which is of a unsigned int. An unsigned int. So these ints which you actually see, these ints you can take even a negative answer, a negative value also. But an unsigned int cannot take a negative value. Okay. So what I've tried to do is basically I've tried to find out the size of the short int. So the short int is basically 2 bytes. Size of the int is 4 bytes. So the size of the int is basically what I've done over here. For this size of the short is I've actually used the data type only. The short variable number, if you give it, so that variable will be basically defined as a short int. So int ans, which is actually again an integer. So I'm taking that as what is the size. So size of int or the size of an int answer will remain the same. Size of float ans, size of char, size of long, size of double. So this long is basically long int. So this number, this int which you actually see is actually a 4 bytes. So a long int will give you 8 bytes. Now in some books for ANSI in some books, you will see that my int is basically my short int, my int is actually 2 bytes. My int is only 2 bytes and my long int is basically 4 bytes. Okay, now some of these books which are written over a long time back, say even let's say for the 80s or the early 90s, then it was right. For those parts it was right. But as my architecture system has actually increased, you will be hearing that your processor is 64-bit, 32-bit, right? All these things you will hear. So what that does mean, it means that basically the size of your data has actually increased, the flow of your data has increased. So as such, since this is the direct output from my operating system only of my architecture, so it is going to give you for my system, which is basically an Intel Core i3 which I have got, right? So this gives me a size of a short int to be a 2 bytes, size of an int to be as a 4 byte, size of a char to be as a 1 byte. And 1 byte is basically 8 bytes. And size of a float to be as a 4 byte. Size of a long to be as 8 byte, size of a double to be as an 8 byte. Okay, so this is, as I was saying, the size of the data type, your data type will be larger. So when I'm trying to multiply a float with an integer, right, even though it's basically of the data, it's a byte size is basically same, but the data type is basically of a higher data type. So it goes from basically the conversion becomes very much easier if you actually basically convert from a short int to an int, into a float to a double, right? Or in short int to a int to basically a long int. Then there will be no loss of data. Then there is no loss of data. Okay. Any question?
So then
So-
float to int
Yeah.
had any warning been shown?
Float to an int,
convert-
there will be look, in between all conversions, a warning will be shown.
Sir, but
Float-
integer is 4 bytes and float is also 4 bytes, so no problem should arise
no,
then.
no. There is a difference between this 4 byte and the integer's 4 byte and a float's 4 byte. Because in a float 4 byte, there is some part which is kept for the integer part, and there is some part which is kept for your float part, real, the decimal part. But whereas for an integer, size of the integer, that 4 bytes, that is totally kept only for your integer part. In your float, there is a difference. There is a partition. There is a partition of that float, that of those 4 bytes, maybe 2 bytes is kept for your, maybe, I'm not saying right, I'm not saying wrong, but maybe 2 bytes may be kept only for the integer part, and 2 bytes might be kept coming only for the real part, for the float values part. The float has got a real part, right? After 0.7, there's got something. So that is why when you try to basically interpret it as a float as an integer, you do not know how it's basically, maybe it's going to basically interpret. So what happens is that, but this is the fun part. So what happens is that at that time, that 4 bytes, it sees totally as one whole and interprets that data as an integer. Okay, so yeah.
So when you're saying that there's a higher data type and a lower data type, is there a data type hierarchy in C?
For loss of for basically not trying to lose your data, right? You can say there is some hierarchy. So short int to a int to a float, short int to a int to a float, right? To a double. So double is basically also a real number. Double is also a real number. So double is basically the double of the size of the float. Or you can have some short int to a int to a long. But float to a long will have problems. Float to a long will have problems. All the operations will be gut-driven, but you won't face any problems with working with your operators. But when it's going to compile it and when you're going to give your answers back to the output, or when you're going to use those outputs to some other place, those are going to creep in. The problems are going to creep in. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any question? Just hold a shit, please. Okay, can we go to the next problem then? So I was over here. So this is done. This is done. Okay. So what I'm going to do is basically just read some characters and just put it on the screen, right? So, so this is basically return and set underscore success. So I'll use a while over here. While so this is a very simple problem. Okay, so there are two functions which I have used, and there is one macro which I have used. So macros exit underscore success, exit underscore failure. These are usually said to be as macros. There is a specific meaning for macros. These are, you can say, these are specifically constants, and UF is also a constant. That is the EUF means end of file, which is defined in the these values of macros have been values defined in the stdi.h. So what it's going to do is basically ch is basically char value. So it's going to read a character from your keyboard. So get char reads from directly from the keyboard, and it goes on reading it. It reads one character at a time. It reads it and it basically goes for a put char, right? And put char is basically prints it on the screen. So how long does it actually go? It goes on till the end of file is basically not being reached. Okay, so for the end of file from a keyboard for the Linux system, generally it is basically Control D, and for a Windows system it is basically Control C. Please remember, so there are these two values are totally different for the two operating systems. It's a general system, general way out. Okay, so let's see what it does actually.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, can you re-explain this part? I didn't get it.
I'll basically explain it a little bit later on. So, but get char and put char is basically they read characters. Get char is a function which is defined in stdio.h, which reads directly from your keyboard, right? While put char when it prints that character on your screen, right? So get char it reads from your keyboard. Where does it basically save? It saves it in a variable by the name ch. So it's going to read your entries from your keyboard. How long? There should be an end, right? So that end is basically it reads till it does not find a EOF. That is the end of file. End of file is a macro which is defined in stdr.h. This is what it simply does.
Okay, sir.
So let's say for oh, sorry. End of file for my Linux system is Control D, right? So, and for your this thing is basically your Windows is basically Control C. Okay, so I read in a character, it puts in a, so A, when I'm actually basically striking the keyboard, it reads that characters by using getchar, right? So A is the, it goes on printing, and a new line is again a character, and I actually basically Control D, I'm ending it. So my, this thing is basically my what do you say, my character, I'm in end of file. So if I want to see basically what is the value of my end of file, so printf, so my, this one will be always been integer actually, percentage d. It technically it will be actually just a one simple yeah, UF is equal to 1. Okay, this will be -1.
Sir,
Yeah,
sir, that getchar will also read any space in white space.
yeah, any character,
Okay.
any character. Even an enter is also character. Even an enter is also character. It reads any character. Okay, till it not reads basically an UF. Right. So let's say for instance, if I try to make it
Sir.
something like an infinite loop, if I do not use this part, then what will actually happen? Okay, so I don't have an end of file, so I will not be able to understand. So where it's going to end? So I press a Control D. So you see basically a unknown character is coming out. Why is an unknown character coming out? The only reason is that end of file is basically -1, right? So -1, it cannot interpret anything, it is as it is. It cannot interpret it. So any, now these characters which we actually basically give, they are what we see to be is also as ASCII code characters. These are what we see to be as ASCII code characters. So I'll just stop it out. Let's say this thing will be there. Let's write a simple program. Percentage D.
Sir, I had a question.
Yeah.
Sir, in the previous program, before you made that line 7 to 12 comments, what was the role of line 11? Can you didn't understand the syntax? EOF is equal
I
to
was
first.
just basically trying to print out the value of the EUF. What was the value of EUF?
Oh, okay.
Okay, end of file. So end of file, even though I had actually, I was trying to basically print, pressing Control D from my keyboard, right? To make
Yes,
it,
sir.
but what was actually the value which is going over there? That was what I tried to show.
Okay, okay. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
sir, what was the significance of that -1 that we were getting after?
The -1 represents, I'll tell you what, I'll just let me complete this part, then I'll actually tell you what is the significance of it.
Okay, sir.
I want to show you a little bit on a small output. Okay, these are basically your ASCII codes. So I'll see only the check the percent, this decimal extreme left, and what is the description, right? So what I was trying to do, I was trying to print all the total number of ASCII codes will be basically 0 to 255, right? That 255 is basically the value which actually represents your shorted. If you remember, your shorted was basically 2 bytes. Somebody is trying to enter a place. Right, I was trying to print it. So if you actually notice, only the characters, there is only some characters which would actually basically being printed. So 0 is your, you can see something like 0 is basically a space. It's only a space, right? Then from the next parts, there are no characters which can be printed because those are illegible characters. So if you see something, so these are something like your, so for your this thing. So there's something start of a heading, start of a text, end of a text, end of a transmission, acknowledgement, bill, backspace. So these are characters which cannot be printed. But what can be printed is from here, 32. So you can see my 32 characters are being printed. So 33, 34, these characters which are actually can be printed. So which you actually see, these are the simple characters of which you actually see directly on your keyboard. These are also referred to be as the Unicode characters. So ASCII characters, these are going to be printed as basically Unicode characters. So I'm just saying they are not Unicode characters, so Unicode characters are a little bit different. So these are some of the characters which you can actually see. Now, my ASCII codes, they all range from 0 to 255. So there is no negative number for it. So if you actually see your program, this was basically what I was trying to do. Any character which I was actually trying to print it on this, while in my line number 8 and my line number 9, they are actually ASCII characters. So if I actually convert this thing also as an integer, so you can see one thing. So getChar is basically what it actually gives returns. This is the function which we actually trying to use. So getChar returns an integer value, right? What actually, if I had what I was doing over for my previous thing, what was I doing? So my getChar is an integer value. What is that value of the integer? The integer value is basically the character which I'm trying to give from my keyboard, which is an integer. Why is it an integer? Because they are all ASCII codes. Now, what I was trying to do is that this integer which I was trying to put it in a variable which is the character type. My character, if you remember from my last program, was basically how many bytes? Character was how many bytes?
One.
1 byte, right? So my character is also a 1 byte. My initial shortint was also 2 bytes. So my character, when I was trying to take an integer, when I'm trying to save it as a character, right? And the value which, if it lies, since it lies between 0 to 255, this gets initialized to this directly. So in one way, my integer value will be masked to as a character over here. My integer value will be masked to as a character over here, which I can basically print it. Now, this thing, since this is basically I can even do this stuff also. So my integer will be an integer. Right? Any questions over here? Why I'm actually interchanging my integer with a character right now?
Sir, getChar is giving an integer value. So when we take ch as a character, is it converting that integer value to the ASCII code? Means how
Come
the
again.
characters
Come again. What you were just saying?
Sir, getChar is giving an integer value and character. Ch we have defined it as character. Then how that can be matched, sir?
Okay, that getChar is actually returns a value which is of the keyboard, right? It's actually takes in only one character 1 by 1 from your keyboard, right? That it converts it to be that the value of which actually lies between 0 to 255. The value of which actually lies between 0 to 255. So the control D, when it actually gives a control D, what it does, it cannot identify it. It cannot identify it, right? So it comes out from there that time. So EOF being a -1, control D is basically the Unix, the Unix equivalent of monarchy. Control D is basically CTRL plus D, right? So that is the equivalent of EOF in the Unix system. For the Windows system, it is basically, I believe, so it's Control D or Control C, right? And it's a Control C, I believe so, right? So Control Z is basically ending of the program in the between. So when it gets to that, when it comes to that -1, which is an EOF, it actually comes out of this loop. So getChar, when it reads that value from the keyboard, it reads that value as an integer value. As an integer.
Sir.
Value. Yes.
So that means if we convert the data type from char to int, for example, of capital A, then it will give an output of 65.
Yeah, that's what I actually did. If you actually see that, this is what I actually did in the previous for the line number 14 to 15. That was what I was trying. That was my objective. So loop was basically a counter. Loop is a variable which is of the integer data type, right? I'm starting from 0. I'm going up to 255, right? And incrementing with the loop plus pass. That was basically the for loop which we done last day. And I was trying to print it. You can see this loop in line number 15. You will see this loop is being printed as an integer and a %C both. %D and a %C both. That was what I was trying to do. That was what I was trying to do actually.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, so an integer and a char if the value lies between 0 to 255, int can be interpreted also as a char also. So an integer value which lies between 0 to 255, it can be interpreted also as a char. This thing should be basically, this is something which we are going to use. But this is a knowledge which you can use proficiently and very efficiently for working later on when you are going to work with it. There are lots of things. You can try to find out patterns, or you can try to find out whether the lies is between a character or not. So there are many things which you can do actually. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay. So, let us see. So my next program will be basically, I'll try to print the total number of characters which has basically come up. Okay, so this will be int, and this one will be count equals to 0. Right. So this can be something like, I might not basically, but I'm trying to basically give the output char. Okay, so count plus plus. Okay, count plus plus, this is equivalent to count equals to count plus 1. There are 3 sorts of operators, okay, in Unix. In C program. Operators are operator types. One, the binary operators. Binary operator means that all operators which take in 2 arguments. So plus, minus, multiplication, division. So for example, something like A plus B or 1 plus 2. So plus is basically a binary operator over here. Okay. What about there is something called a unary operator also. So unary operator, what it does, it takes in only single parameter. It works only on a single parameter. So plus plus, minus minus, plus equals to, minus equals to, just a second, please. Just see one thing, that is basically check page 53 of So this is the book which is so you'll see that there is actually a properties of basically the precedence and associativity. So this is very important when you are going to work with your let's take for example your for multiple for your let's take for example you can see your algebraic equations. So plus this thing, so this minus equals to then this is something like okay, binary operators are also these less than equal to, greater than equal to. So this is basically equivalent to right. This is not equal to, this is equivalent to, this is not equal to, less than equal to, this thing. This one is basically, this means that this plus plus means this plus plus equals is equivalent to, this is something like a plus plus, right, is equivalent to something like a equals to a plus 1, right. Minus minus will be, there are again two things, it can be this one or plus plus a. So the previous one basically my postfix addition, and this is my prefix addition. I'll come to this basically what it means. So this is basically a minus minus, so this is equivalent to a equals to a minus 1, right. So this one and or equivalent to or I have got even minus a. So this one is the postfix subtraction, one is the second one is the prefix subtraction. I have got plus equals to, this is equivalent to a plus equals to, let's take for example 2. This equivalently means a is equal to a plus 2. I've got minus equals to, this means a minus equals to a equals to a minus 2. Sorry. 2. Okay. So then I have got a division equals to. So division equals to is the same thing. And there is another operator, that is what we see as a ternary operator. This ternary operator, which I'm not going to basically, this is the equals to, this is something which I'm not going to basically discuss right now. I'm going to come to it later on. So has anybody got the hold of the operators? Hello?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
আরে বাবা মাঝখানে মাঝখানে বলিস তোরা আছিস, না হলে কি হচ্ছে আমি নিজেও বুঝতে পারছি না যে I do not understand মানে my connection has been got lost or not. So
Okay,
sometimes at least give some signal that you are there.
Okay, sir.
Okay,
sir.
so this is basically count plus 1 1, and I'm going to, at the end of the day, I'm going to basically give printf the total number of characters are percentage d. So let's take for example this one will be, go for a new line, over here percentage d.
স্যার পুটক্যাটটা আরেকবার বলে দেবেন, পুটক্যাটটা।
পুটক্যাটটা ওই সিএইচটাকে বেসিক্যালি ডিসপ্লেতে প্রিন্ট করে দেয়। এই যে সিএইচটা যেটা আমি নিয়েছিলাম সেটা ডিসপ্লেতে প্রিন্ট করে দেবে এটা। আগে
ঠিক
দেখুন।
আছে স্যার।
ঠিক আছে? এটা basically root variable. Again, I'm telling you, basically, if you cannot basically get hold of a program, immediately, if you cannot basically see you can actually basically go for this man. This obviously this is only available for Unix only, unfortunately. So putcat is basically something like this. So there are 4 variants: fputc, fputs, putc, putcat. So this is no more used nowadays. Putcat is a more this thing. Put is basically it prints a string. We'll come to that later on when we get to the putc. So this is something which I'm going to see. So you can see it takes in an integer of C. Integer C. But then what I have actually done, even if I had actually, if you see for your last, so this thing, so this one will work. Why? Because ch, when it's actually being taken into as a putcat into this function, is being masked as basically as integer. If I use ch to be as a char, but it's all the same thing. If I actually use it, that hardly matters. Okay, so the cat 3. Sorry. Any question from this thing? So let's see what happens. So QWERTY. So an enter, I have actually pressed an enter. Okay. So for an enter, what is actually doing is putcat is basically just printing that whole part which is already there. And then I give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going to give an enter. Then Control D. You see there's a 15. So let's see if it is actually 15. So this is 6. This is 6. 6 and 6 and what? How many characters are there? 6 and 7 is 13, right? And there were 2 enters which I had given. So there are 15 characters. So we have got 15 characters. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's see one thing again. So QWE. I'm going to give I'm pressing a backspace right now. Right. So there is a backspace. And then 2 characters. Then I give a Control D. So the total number of characters is 5. How come it is 5? So backspace, that 1 character has been deleted, right? Let's see. So I'm pressing Control V's. See, there's another character which is coming out, 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Control V is 1 character, Control V is another character. So I have got 7 characters. The first 5 and the 7 characters. So this, what it does, basically just prints and the total number of counts it just gives you. Okay?
Sir,
Hmm.
sir, if each number and each letter is counted as one character and enter is also counted as another character, then isn't the answer a bit short? Like some characters are missing. Like it should not be 15, it should be higher than that.
Why?
Like
You're talking about the QWERT problem. You're talking about the QWERTY, right?
yes.
Okay, so let's see one thing. QWERT, this is 6 characters. Okay, after that I had given an enter. Due to that enter, the total thing which was there, what putcat did was the total thing which was which we had taken it again prints it, but the character is actually an enter. Okay, so the enter will be a character. Then after that I'll be giving a 1, 2, 2. So this is basically 3, 3, 6, 7. So 7 plus previously 7, 14, right? After 5, I given another enter. So due to this enter, this 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5 will be again printed. Then I'm giving a control D. Now control D is a -1. Once it comes to a -1, it actually comes out. It does not even count. It does not increase that count. And then it prints it.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so you see these two double lines, that is a 1 double 2 3 2 times this cube. There is a 2 duplicate lines because I have given an enter. But that part will not be basically considered twice. Okay.
Okay, sir. Sir, but in the second case, when you give the space, it didn't count, sir. Why?
Which one?
So QWE // that case, you'd give space at the first time.
No, I did not give a space. I give a backspace.
Backspace, sorry. So, sir, but it didn't count. Means
no, the backspace basically deleted it. Okay, this is something 1, 2, 3. Backspace, I believe so. It does not have any characters, but ASCII characters. If it does not have any ASCII characters, if it cannot interpret it, so it's not going to basically come out. So it's not going to basically, it's just going to just go ahead with it. Because to come out of this, basically the loop, you have to be only an EOF. So -1. So if it is either 0 to 255, if it is either 0 to 255 or a -1, then this whole system works. But if it is something else, it will just take the character, but even it won't do anything. The count field won't matter for that. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Let's do something different right now. Let's do this thing with only a, what do you say, with a for loop, right? So just for your information, I'm actually following the book of Cunningham-Ritchie. Okay, so because what Cunningham-Ritchie actually helps me to do is basically cover a lot part of your syllabus in a very shorter time. And unfortunately, usually I do not follow.
Sir, that means that book, the
yeah.
sir, that book, the C programming language.
Yeah, I'm following that book actually. I myself am following that book, but it doesn't mean that you have to follow the book. The programs which I'm doing, they are mostly from that book only, from the Cunningham-Ritchie book only, but I'm modifying again it on my own, in my own way. So this while character, this function which you actually just see, it's already given in the Cunningham-Ritchie book. So for I'll have something like for count equals to 0. I want to basically take this thing. Get CAD is not equals to EOF. Okay. Plus okay, count plus. I'm just going to basically, I'm not giving any put CAD over here. Okay. So since I'm not going to give any put CAD over here, this loop does everything in one way, right? So I'm not printing the characters. I'm just going to basically give in the characters, and it's going to go on reading it till there is no key that the UF does not come out. So since I'm just my main motive is just to count the character input characters. Okay, that was all. So since I'm not putting it characters, so since my line number 14, this does everything. So what it starts is actually starts from a loop count. It counts from a 0, right? then it goes for a get char, it reads that get char. It's not an UF, then it counts. So count is equal to count plus 1. Okay, and then it's going to basically print at the, so since there is no other statements over there, I give a semicolon over here only. The semicolon at the end of a loop means that that loop does all the stuff. That loop itself does all the stuff. Right?
Can you repeat that statement? Like what?
So can you please
what we had actually done something else. So this was something what we used to do, right? Right.
Yes, sir.
Right. So let's say, for example, I give something like this. Ch. Let's do. Okay, let's see. This thing, anyway, it is clear. This line.
Yes, sir.
Any questions about this line?
No.
You see that for loop, I just basically converted that this 8, 9, 10 into one single loop. Right? And put card is basically in another statement. Okay. So I'll give this same output input over there. This QWERTY I'll give QWERTY enter 1. Sorry. 3, 3, 4, 5. Enter. Control D. Okay. Any problem? So it does the same stuff. Okay. Kind of সবাই জানতে পারছিস তো?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So this is basically a post. So I don't have only have it. So this is basically a postfix operator. So let's say basically I give a plus count. Right. So this is a prefix operator. So let's see what will happen right now. So again, I'm going to give the same input QWERTY 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. Control D. So there is actually no change. There should be actually a change. Okay. Okay.
স্যার এটা কথা বলবো 13টা ক্যারেক্টার আছে না যদি দেখি
কোথায় রে 13টা
এন্টারটা ধরে 15টা
আমি তো দুবার এন্টার দিচ্ছি আমি দুবার এন্টার দিচ্ছি
ও আচ্ছা হ্যাঁ ঠিক
আছে এটা তো তুই আগের বারই যে প্রোগ্রামটা যেটা আছে
হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ
ঠিক আছে so if let's take for example my main over here what I was trying to do I was trying to print the characters right I was printing the characters now my main objective if my objective had only to actually just count the characters only to count the characters then I did not this if this had been something like this right so I did not require this thing I do not even require to read my characters I read my characters but I'm not required to basically save it in a value so if I do this stuff only then I don't have any basically any other statements after count so there are no statements after count it's only my statements ends over here only okay if I do this thing then the same thing will actually happen it's only that ঠিক আছে? Okay, so I get the same thing over there. It's only that since I was basically pressing the key, it was displayed on the keyboard. But this display is not due to the put cat. This was not due to the put cat, right? So this was due to the keyboard pressing only, and there was no basically assignment to any sort of a value. That was a CH. So it just basically it was two enters which gave me 15, right? And there was a control D after that. So I can't, but technically, if I have, there can be some other statement, there can be statements where it can be done in one full loop only. So you don't require to basically mess around, add some other these things, some other statements over here also. Okay, this whole thing I could have done it with between a simple thing also. So let's say, for example, I'm going to use the for, but I'm not going to assign any character over here. So this is basically a blank. So I start off with a count with a 0. So this is similar to if you actually see the while loop, which will be also doing. So ch equals to get cat, right? Now, if ch is not equal to EOF, then count it plus plus, else so I come to another programming statement that is basically if else, right? So it's basically if condition, then do some stuff, else do some other stuffs. So if ch is not equal to for UF, so if this is true, then my count plus plus will work. Else, if this is false, so if so if this is, then it will basically, so that is if ch becomes 0 equivalent to UF, then it will basically work. Break. So break means I'm coming out of that loop. I'm working, this is the braces. So once if I give a break, so this is the, it's going to come out of the immediate braces which it follows. So break is going to break this braces. So the braces between line number, so this is something. So line number 15 and 421. Okay, so you see that in the for, I have not given anything. I have not even given anything, but then still this is supposed to work. This will do. So okay, so if I want to actually give another statement over here, so if I've got more than multiple statements, then I can put it, then I have to put it in braces. So this brace means that this is basically, this is a part of this whole if, this true part. So this comes between braces. If it's only a single statement, either you can give a brace or you don't have to give a brace. It works out. Okay, so what we'll actually do is something like this. So since I'm putting in the card, you can see due to the enter, that whole previous line is being replicated. 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 5. Okay. So I just write this line over here again, just for your this thing. For so this one I'm doing because count has already been initialized, so I don't require to basically give a count again. So I'm not going to initialize with the count again.
So if we hadn't given the break, then it would have been a infinite loop.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Get char not equals to so this only counts. Okay. Any question here? Any question about the if then else? If else rather the then is not there. So if then else basically you can say. Any question? Anything?
No, sir.
No, sir.
Yeah, you have any question? Look, I'm actually moving a little bit very fast, but you have to catch on. I understand that there are many students who do not have any programming skills, but if you actually see if you follow the book which I'm actually following, or if you follow any other book, and if you follow each of the programs which I'm actually doing, you don't have to basically think that you have any knowledge about programming. This does not require any, but I'm actually going through in such a way that you do not require to have any previous knowledge of programming. Some of you might be thinking, since this is basically advanced programming. No. But look, the technical thing is that basically you are students coming out from the toppers of the joint entrance, right? So I won't be spoon feeding you as many books will be doing. Right. So I'll be thinking that you have to catch up. This you have to catch up with it. Okay.
Yes, sir.
I'll get into another program and I'll end it today only. Class. Yeah, the next day I'll basically get into something else. Any questions about today's class? Just hold a second, please. আমি ক্লাসে আছি, আমি তোকে পরে কল করছি। Yes, anybody has got any questions? Again, nothing. About the three functions, so I'll just open the three functions today. What we have done.
So just one question. Sir, you said EOF was a macro defined in stdio.h. So
Yeah.
can you briefly define what's a macro?
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll take up that simple problem. Last day's problem, I'll just take it up. Okay. So let's take up this problem. Okay, I'll just copy this. Okay. So you see one thing, if my step count was not there, these two are constants, right? These two are constants value. So what I can do is basically is hash define Okay. So this is basically an example of a macro. So these are 4 and 5, you can see. So this is basically, this is a self-defined macro. A macro is what do you say? What happens is that when I'm going to basically compile this thing, whole thing, this thing is basically, after this compilation, what happens is that this lower value in line number 11, that gets replaced with the value of 0. Please note, I'm saying replaced. Okay. And the value of the upper gets replaced with the value of 300. Mind it again, if you see this line number 4, this is basically, I have given, how is it written? Written, you can see, hash define, the macro name, a space, and a value. This value can be anything. So when the whole program will be compiled, what will happen is that value, that macro's value, the symbol with which that macro will be defined is just being, macro defines is just being replaced. That is all what it is doing. So a macro is a symbol which represents some value. That value can be a string, that value can be a character, that value can be basically, that can value be a numerical value also, anything. So I can also have something like, this is a very common thing which we do. I can have lots of values, and I can use this pi value in somewhere between this program if I want.
So this has to be in uppercase while defining that.
The norm is that basically it has to be an uppercase, and the norm is the norm, right? Because it has to be something different from your, this thing has to be different from the variable name. It's again a naming style. No, it does not have to be basically a capital characters. It does not have to be, right? It does not have to be, but there should be a difference between the variable namings you actually do and the characters, these are constant something, right? And some constants which you actually defined. If I had given, this one also would have been right. This is also right. This is also right. But this is a convention which you can actually see. It's just a convention. It's a convention states that all macros is written in capital letters. It's not should be, is written in capital. So it's a convention. it's something of basically which we follow for better programming practices, that all macros should be written in capital letters.
So
But
when
if
you're
you
writing lower 0 and upper 300, lower and upper are constants and not variables.
Okay, no, these are not constants. When it's going to be when it's going to be compiled, what happens is that far will be the lower value in line number 11. In line number 11, right, this lower will be replaced with the symbol 0. Now, when it's being replaced with a 0 over here, then this will work like an arithmetic function.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I can have even like hash define this can be something like this also. So what I'm doing, mind it, this is a card is basically a variable. It's basically a symbol. This card and the card which in the program which I'm actually going to give a char over there, right? These two are totally different, because what we say C programming is said to be as a strictly typed programming language. It means that a small card, a small char and a capital char both means different, right? So this thing, when I'm going to work with this card over here with to see, I can have something like this card card can be something like sorry, this one will be right, I can have something like let's say for example hash define step, just for my easiest sake is basically let's take the time, so I don't require something like this thing, I don't require something like this thing, float step. Okay, okay, let's see what happens. GCC. Okay, there is an error before float. Line number 13, right? Okay, there is a character between. Okay, so this is a problem. Okay, what are the problems it's going to face? Missing terminating. Okay, this is a terminating character is not being given. Sorry. What are the things is that is been done? Character C undeclared. So this one will be this thing. Okay, let's see. Right. So line number 13 and 21, this becomes solved because this character was not there. Okay, let's see what happens is that. Yeah, you can see this C is being printed. Due to this line number 15, this C is being printed. So what happens is this, whenever after the compilation has been done, the character is being replaced with this quote C, single quote C with a single quote, right? Opening single quote. So this value is being CAD is being replaced. CAD is being replaced. Please note, this is not assigned. This is not assigned. This is just being replaced. So once it's being replaced, so effectively after it is being replaced, what will actually look like character CAD character equals to, so this line and CAD character is equal to CHAR is the same thing. So this is equivalent to this both.
Sir,
Yes.
sir, in macro we have defined that upper equal to upper 300. So sir,
Yeah.
if we do some operation and if the value of upper changes, then when we will print the value, will it be printed 300 or the new value?
No, but okay, this is the problem. Now, if you want to do anything, okay, but if you want to work with this, but if you want to change the value of upper, you just have to hard code it. If I want to basically change it to, let's take for example 500, so I just remove, say this is 500. So the advantage of this thing is that since all your macros are defined in one place, and if I want to do some changing with the values of those macros, I just have to change these values over here in the macro only. I don't have to
if
search
we
for
do
this whole
some
program.
operation
Okay,
with that value.
let's take for example, let's say one thing. Let's say for example, pi is the value which you are using in, let's take for example, in a 4000 line about 20 times. Let's imagine. Okay, you are using the value of pi about 20 times in a 4000 line code. A 4000 line code is a very small code, please remember. It's a very small amount of lines of code. It's not a huge amount of lines of code. Okay, when you're going to maybe do your projects in the long run, when you're going to work with your projects in your final semester or in your final year, or if you started with interns in, you see that 4000 lines of code is nothing. Okay, so you're using that value of pi, okay, 4000 times, but about 20 to 25 times in a 4000 line code. Okay, now you are working, your value of pi is 3.14. Okay, somebody comes and say tomorrow, okay, look, I don't want a two decimal values, give me a 15 decimal value. What will you do? Technically, you will be basically searching for all those 20 lines in the whole of that code for the value of pi, and you're going to replace that 2 values with the 15 values, right? Am I right or wrong?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
But if you had actually defined the macro with a pi, okay, and you had used this macro about 20 times in the value, 20 times in that 4000 line of code, right? So if somebody had come to basically come to you and say that, look, I don't want a 2 decimal, I want a 15 decimal value. So what you had to basically just override this value of pi, which you have pi over here, with the 15 with the extra other data, right? And when it's going to
So
compile,
no, I am asking that, sir, upper we have written pi equal to 3.14, but
Yeah.
inside the function main we write that pi equal to 3. Then when we will print that value of pi, then what will be printed, 3.14 or 3? That was asking, sir.
look, when I'm going to when you want to print the value of pi.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Sir, upper
okay,
we have defined
okay, 3.14 is basically what? It's actually a float value. Think of this,
Yes,
not
sir.
this. Don't think of this symbol pi. Think of the value of 3.14. Right? When you're going to
Yes,
print
sir.
the value of 3.14, right? So, okay, you want to print it. Okay, you want, are you saying something like this? Okay, let's see, percentage.
Sir,
Yes.
Sir, actually the doubt was like if inside the main function if I do like pi plus plus, so it believe after
No, it
that
won't work. No, it
statement
won't work. No, 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 it won't work. These are constants. These are constant values. Pi plus
okay.
plus won't work. These
So
are
no,
constant
if we
values.
inside the function we write pi equal to 3, we define that pi equal to 3. Then if we print, then
If
what
you
will be
define
printed?
something
Pi
like this,
equal to
so if you could define something like this, pi is equal to pi, and then you give pi equals to pi plus equals to 0.5. This is a valid statement. But pi plus equals to 0.5. This is the wrong statement. You want to see? I'll show you. It's very easy. You just compile it. Why take all the trouble? Okay, let's take for example. I just remove this part. So we'll see there will be an error in line number 17. Okay. Okay. Because pi is basically what? What is happening? Because when it's being compiled, this pi will be replaced with 3.14. So this is technically what you are doing is 3.14 plus equals to 0.5. This is actually what you are doing. But this is no statement. So can you say something like this? This is technically what you're doing. 3.14 equals to 3.14 plus 0.5. This is actually what you're trying to do. So 3.14 is actually a constant. So any numeric value, that's a constant. Are you trying to understand? Are you understanding what I'm trying to mean over here? So please remember this pi over here, these values, these are not variables. Please note this thing. These are not variables. These are just symbols, which while compiling, these symbols will be replaced with the value with the symbol which is being replaced with. So 300 is the symbol which is being replaced, which is being assigned the symbol, another symbol with an upper. So it's something like a symbol is replacing another symbol. So in this constant, and when in the program, when this symbol is, so what happens is that line number 15, I'll just remove this thing. In line number 15, what is happening? Pi is a variable. Right? Small pi is a variable which I am assigning to capital Pi. So after compilation, this pi gets replaced with 3.14. Once it gets get replaced as 3.14, it starts behaving like a number. Because 3.14 is a character, is a number. So it starts behaving like a number. Okay, so these macros are actually symbols for some other symbols, representing other symbol. So instead of basically 300 in my program, since it is basically an upper limit, right? So I'm representing that value 300 with a symbol. Are you getting it?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So this is basically what a macro is all about. there are many uses of macros, and there are pitfalls of also macros. We'll come to that later on. Pitfalls, but the pitfalls of macros are when these macros start defining to be as basically as functions, behave something like functions. Then the problem starts. So these are basically in these macros over here, these are behaving something like what do you say, as something like okay, let's say something like this. As defined fn to be as fn multiplied by fn minus 1. Okay, let's see. I'll just remove these parts. So, okay, I'll just remove these parts. So, okay, let's see. Now I've got int
So when will the class end?
okay, I'll get this thing later on. Okay, I believe so. Today is basically we are almost. I'll get this thing later on because this one will be very much relevant when I'm going to get into functions. Okay, this is very much relevant when I'm going to get into functions. Okay, any question till here? Today's class. So scanf you have done, printf you have done, and today I'm going to give you some assignments. You can actually have a look at it. Okay, macros you have worked with. Okay. So this, since some step I'm going to give, so this is more important. So rather, this is also not important if I actually basically see this program completely. So these things works like, okay. Chalo, if there are no questions, then we can basically go for it. Any questions, anybody? Okay, then we'll next day we'll meet on a regular schedule. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
Thank you.